Did you ever stop to realize how many things from the 1980s make absolutely no sense to anyone born after the year 2000? These everyday habits shaped an entire generation, defining how people communicated, entertained themselves, and survived daily life. So what made these routines so essential back then? Waiting all week to watch your favorite show was one of the defining experiences of the 1980s, and it shaped how families spent their evenings in ways that feel almost unbelievable today. If you missed an episode, you missed it, and there was no streaming service or recording device in most homes to save the day. People planned their entire schedules around television, rearranging dinner, homework, and phone calls just to be seated in front of the screen at the exact moment the show began. The anticipation built all week long, turning a simple sitcom or drama into a genuine event that brought households together. Kids talked about cliffhangers at school the next morning because everyone had watched at the same time, sharing a collective experience that bonded classmates and coworkers alike. There was no skipping ahead, no binge watching, and absolutely no way to avoid spoilers if you happened to be running late. The wait made every episode feel more valuable, more exciting, and more memorable than anything you could casually click on today. It was appointment viewing at its purest, and the ritual of gathering together gave television a weight and importance that streaming simply cannot replicate. Memorizing phone numbers by heart was something every person in the 1980s did without even thinking about it, storing dozens of digits in their brain like a personal directory that never needed batteries. There were no contact lists saved in a device, no speed dial shortcuts to rely on, and absolutely no way to look someone up unless you had already committed their number to memory. Kids memorized the numbers of their best friends, their grandparents, their favorite pizza place, and the one neighbor who always let them borrow the lawnmower. The process happened naturally through repetition, dialing the same sequence over and over until it became as automatic as tying shoes. People rattled off 7 digits without hesitation, and area codes only mattered when calling long distance, which cost extra and required planning ahead. Losing touch with someone meant genuinely losing them, because once a number slipped out of memory, there was no digital backup to restore it. That mental effort made every connection feel more deliberate, more personal, and more valuable than anything stored in a smartphone today. The brain was the original cloud, and it never crashed. Using a payphone with actual coins was a skill every person in the 1980s needed to master, because without a handful of change, you had no way to make a call when you were away from home. These metal boxes stood on street corners, inside malls, and next to gas stations, waiting for anyone desperate enough to dig through pockets for a quarter or two. The ritual involved lifting a heavy receiver, listening for a dial tone, dropping the coins into the slot, and praying the person on the other end would answer before time ran out. If the call went to voicemail or nobody picked up, your money vanished into the machine without refund or sympathy. Kids learned quickly to always carry spare change, because being stranded without coins meant walking, waiting, or finding a stranger kind enough to lend a dime. Long-distance calls from a payphone cost more, and the operator's voice interrupting to demand additional payment became a familiar nightmare. These phones smelled like metal and city air, the cords were always tangled, and the booths offered just enough privacy to whisper secrets or cry quietly. It was communication at its most inconvenient and strangely human. Blowing into video game cartridges was a sacred ritual in the 1980s that every child performed without question, convinced beyond doubt that a single breath could fix any glitch the console decided to throw. When the screen flickered, froze, or refused to load, the first instinct was to yank out the cartridge, bring it close to your face, and blow a steady stream of air across the exposed pins. Kids did this with confidence passed down from older siblings, neighborhood friends, and the shared wisdom of playgrounds everywhere. The strange part is that it rarely made any real difference, since dust was not usually the problem, but the routine felt so satisfying that nobody ever stopped to ask why. Sometimes you blew once, sometimes 3 times, and sometimes you performed elaborate combinations of blowing, shaking, and reinserting until the game finally cooperated. Parents watched in confusion as their children treated plastic cartridges like magical artifacts that responded to breath alone. It became muscle memory, an automatic response to any technical failure, and the sound of that sharp exhale still echoes in the minds of anyone who grew up gaming in that era. Rewinding rental tapes before returning them was a rule everyone in the 1980s understood without needing an explanation, because the words "Be kind, rewind" were printed on every video store receipt and membership card. Failing to rewind meant facing a small fee at the counter, a disappointed look from the clerk, and the guilt of knowing the next customer would have to wait while the machine whirred backward. Families argued over whose job it was to handle the rewind, and dedicated machines existed solely for that purpose, sitting beside televisions like tiny shrines to home entertainment etiquette. The sound of tape spinning inside a VCR became the soundtrack to countless Friday nights, a signal that one movie had ended and the ritual of returning it had begun. Kids learned responsibility through this chore, understanding that borrowed things required care and consideration for the person who would use them next. Forgetting to rewind felt like a social failure, a tiny betrayal of an unspoken agreement that held the entire rental system together. Today, streaming has erased every trace of this obligation, but the phrase still lingers in memory like a friendly reminder from a simpler time. Getting up to change the TV channel was such a normal part of life in the 1980s that children accepted it without complaint, becoming the unofficial remote controls of their own households. Before wireless devices became standard, the only way to switch stations was to walk across the living room, reach for the dial or row of buttons, and click through the limited options one at a time. Parents assigned this task to whichever child happened to be closest, and arguments erupted over who had to get up during the best part of a show. The carpet path between the couch and the television wore down faster than anywhere else in the house. Sometimes you stood by the set during commercials, ready to flip the moment someone shouted from the sofa. There was a strange sort of power in being the channel changer, deciding how long to linger on each station before moving on. Kids developed preferences for certain numbers, memorizing which channels carried cartoons and which ones their parents wanted for the evening news. That short walk across the room now feels like ancient history, replaced by voice commands and touchscreens that require nothing but a whisper. Recording songs off the radio onto cassette tapes was a delicate art that required patience, timing, and a willingness to accept imperfection as part of the process. In the 1980s, buying every album was impossible for most families, so kids learned to wait by the radio with a blank tape loaded and a finger hovering over the record button. The goal was to capture a favorite song from start to finish without the DJ talking over the intro or cutting off the final note. Hours passed listening to stations, hoping the right track would finally come on. And when it did, the rush to hit record in time created a surge of adrenaline no playlist can replicate. Sometimes you caught everything perfectly, and sometimes the tape ran out mid-chorus, leaving a half-finished treasure that still felt worth keeping. Mixtapes assembled from these recordings became deeply personal gifts, each one representing hours of effort and a genuine desire to share something meaningful. The hiss of the tape, the occasional static, and the faint echo of radio interference all became part of the music itself. That handmade quality gave every recording a warmth that digital perfection can never quite match. Calling time and temperature for the weather was a habit that made perfect sense in the 1980s, when checking conditions outside meant dialing a specific number and listening to a recorded voice recite the forecast. There were no weather apps, no live radar maps on phones, and no instant notifications warning about incoming storms. Instead, people picked up the receiver, punched in a sequence everyone in town had memorized, and waited for the automated message to tell them whether to grab an umbrella or wear a coat. The voice on the other end became oddly familiar, a robotic friend who delivered temperatures and predictions with calm precision at any hour. Families called before road trips, before picnics, before deciding whether to hang laundry outside or risk the rain. Kids learned the number young, treating it like a secret code that unlocked the mysteries of the sky. Businesses sponsored the service, so sometimes you heard a brief advertisement before the temperature arrived, but nobody minded because the information felt essential. Today, a glance at a screen provides more detail in seconds, but the ritual of dialing for the weather holds a certain charm that convenience has quietly erased. Using encyclopedias for school reports was the only option students had in the 1980s when teachers assigned research projects that required facts, figures, and citations. There was no internet to search, no databases to query, and no digital libraries waiting at the click of a button. Instead, families invested in heavy sets of alphabetized volumes that lined bookshelves like monuments to knowledge, their spines labeled from A to Z. Kids learned to flip through pages, scanning headers until the right article appeared, then carefully copying information by hand into spiral notebooks. Cross-referencing meant pulling out another volume and starting the search again, a process that could consume entire afternoons. The smell of those pages, slightly musty and faintly inky, became synonymous with homework and late nights. Libraries offered backup sets for those who could not afford their own, and the research section hummed with whispered conversations. That slow, deliberate hunt for answers taught patience and persistence in ways that instant search results never could, turning every report into an expedition through printed knowledge. Adjusting rabbit ear antennas for better reception was a household ritual that everyone in the 1980s performed with a mixture of hope, frustration, and creative problem-solving. These twin metal rods sat atop television sets, waiting to be twisted, extended, and repositioned until the static cleared and the picture sharpened. Kids became experts at finding the exact angle that worked, sometimes standing in strange poses because the signal improved whenever a human body was nearby. Parents shouted directions from the couch, guiding the designated adjuster through tiny movements that made the difference between clarity and noise. Aluminum foil wrapped around the tips was a common trick, believed to boost reception even though nobody could explain why. Weather affected everything, and stormy nights meant constant adjustments as channels drifted in and out. The moment the picture locked in felt like a small victory, a reward for patience that cable boxes eventually made unnecessary. But for those who lived it, the memory of wrestling with rabbit ears remains a strangely fond reminder of how hard entertainment once was to capture. Passing handwritten notes in class was the original form of texting, a secret communication network that ran through desks, down aisles, and across entire classrooms without teachers ever catching on. In the 1980s, kids folded paper into tiny squares, triangles, or elaborate origami shapes before sliding them carefully to the next person in the chain. The notes carried everything from gossip and jokes to heartfelt confessions and dramatic questions with checkboxes for yes, no, or maybe. Getting caught meant public humiliation if the teacher decided to read it aloud, so the stakes felt genuinely high for everyone involved. Friends developed codes, used invisible ink pens, and created elaborate passing routes that avoided the watchful eyes at the front of the room. The anticipation of receiving a note, unfolding it slowly beneath the desk, and reading words meant only for you created a thrill that no notification can match. Some notes were saved for years, tucked into journals or shoeboxes as proof that someone once cared enough to write by hand. That slow, risky, deeply personal form of connection has vanished entirely, replaced by instant messages that disappear without a trace. Waiting for photos to be developed was an exercise in patience that most people today cannot even imagine. A delay between capturing a moment and actually seeing it that could stretch for days or even weeks. In the 1980s, cameras used rolls of film that had to be dropped off at drugstores, photo labs, or mailed away in prepaid envelopes before anyone knew if a single shot had turned out properly. You handed over the roll, received a claim ticket, and waited with no preview, no delete button, and absolutely no way to retake anything that might have gone wrong. The moment you finally picked up that envelope and flipped through the glossy prints felt like unwrapping a gift, even when half the pictures were blurry, overexposed, or missing heads entirely. People accepted imperfection because there was no alternative, and every decent photo felt like a small miracle worth celebrating. Families gathered around kitchen tables to sort through stacks of prints, laughing at mistakes and choosing favorites for albums. That delay made memories feel more precious, more permanent, and more worth protecting than anything stored on a phone. Sharing one household phone with the whole family was a daily negotiation that tested patience, privacy, and the strength of sibling relationships in ways that feel almost unimaginable now. In the 1980s, most homes had a single telephone mounted on a kitchen wall or sitting on a hallway table, and everyone from parents to teenagers had to take turns using it throughout the day. Conversations happened in the open, where anyone walking by could hear every word, and the only hope for privacy was stretching the coiled cord as far as it would reach into a closet or bathroom. Siblings fought over who got to call friends first, parents interrupted important conversations to make their own calls, and anyone expecting a call had to hover near the phone like a guard on duty. The sound of someone picking up the extension to eavesdrop became instantly recognizable, a soft click followed by breathing that ruined every secret being shared. There was no caller ID, no voicemail in most homes, and no way to know who was calling until you answered the receiver yourself. That shared lifeline taught patience and compromise in ways that personal devices have completely erased from modern family life. Buying music without hearing it first was an act of faith that every music lover in the 1980s accepted as completely normal, a gamble that could lead to either joy or crushing disappointment with no way to know until you got home. You walked into a record store, flipped through rows of albums organized by artist, and made your choice based entirely on the cover art, the band name, or a recommendation from a friend. There were no streaming previews, no sample clips online, and no algorithm suggesting what you might enjoy based on previous listening history. You paid full price, took the record or cassette home, and only then discovered whether you had found a treasure or wasted your entire allowance on something terrible. Sometimes the gamble paid off brilliantly, introducing you to music that changed your life and stayed with you forever. Other times, the first listen brought crushing disappointment that could not be undone or returned. That risk made every purchase feel meaningful, every discovery more exciting, and every favorite album something earned through patience rather than handed to you by recommendation. Checking a paper TV guide for what was on became a weekly ritual that shaped how families planned their evenings throughout the 1980s, turning a simple magazine into an essential household tool. The publication arrived in the mail or sat in a rack by the grocery checkout, packed with grids showing every channel and every time slot for the entire week ahead in tiny printed rows. People circled shows they wanted to watch, argued over conflicts when two favorites aired at the same time, and memorized the schedule like it was a personal calendar that determined their nightly plans. There was no scrolling through an on-screen menu, no searching by title or genre, and absolutely no option to watch something later if you happened to miss the broadcast window. The TV guide became a planning document, a reference manual, and sometimes a source of family drama when someone lost it or spilled coffee on the listings before the week was over. Kids flipped to the movie listings first, hoping to spot something exciting hidden in the late-night hours after their parents went to sleep. That thin magazine held all the answers to a question that seems almost ridiculous today. Smoking sections in restaurants were a bizarre compromise that everyone in the 1980s accepted as perfectly reasonable, even though the idea makes absolutely no sense when you think about it today. Hostesses would ask, smoking or non-smoking, as if a thin partition or a handful of empty tables could actually separate clean air from clouds of drifting cigarette smoke. Families sat in the non-smoking section believing they were protected, while visible haze floated over from booths just a few feet away without any barrier to stop it. The smell clung to clothes, hair, and food, turning every meal into an unintentional secondhand smoking experience that nobody questioned at the time. Ashtrays sat on tables like standard dishware, and the sound of lighters clicking became background noise as familiar as silverware or ice in glasses. Nobody questioned it because smoking indoors was simply part of public life, woven into restaurants, offices, and shopping malls. Children grew up breathing restaurant smoke without anyone considering the health implications for young lungs. Looking back, it feels surreal that society once divided dining rooms as if nicotine respected invisible boundaries. Getting directions from gas station attendants was the only reliable way to navigate unfamiliar roads in the 1980s, a human-powered GPS system built entirely on trust, hope, and the willingness to ask strangers for help. When drivers got lost, they pulled into the nearest service station, walked inside past the candy racks and motor oil displays, and asked whoever stood behind the counter how to reach their destination. The attendant would think for a moment, maybe scratch their chin, then rattle off a series of turns, landmarks, and approximate distances that sounded perfectly simple but often fell apart the moment you drove away from the lot. Some attendants gave perfect directions delivered with absolute confidence that matched the reality of the roads. Others sent you deeper into confusion with vague references to buildings that no longer existed or turns that only made sense to people who had lived there for decades. Folding maps helped when you could find the right one, but reading them while driving was its own dangerous adventure. That era required patience for wrong turns that smartphones have completely eliminated from modern travel. Using whiteout to correct typing mistakes was a slow, messy ritual that every student and office worker in the 1980s knew far too well, a physical battle against errors that computers would later make disappear with a single keystroke. Before word processors allowed instant deletion, typewriters punched permanent letters onto paper, and every mistake required a hands-on solution that took time and precision. The small bottle of white correction fluid sat beside every machine, ready to paint over wrong words with a thick, chemical-smelling paste that seemed to take forever to dry completely. You brushed it on carefully, blew on it impatiently, waited what felt like an eternity, and then typed over the dried patch, hoping the new letters would line up with the rest of the sentence. Sometimes the fluid went on too thick and created a visible lump that stood out on the page. Other times it cracked and flaked off days later, leaving the original mistake peeking through like a ghost. The smell of that correction fluid, sharp and slightly intoxicating, became synonymous with deadlines, frustration, and the desperate hope that nobody would notice the patchy spots. Hearing a busy signal when calling someone was one of the most frustrating sounds of the 1980s, a harsh repeating tone that meant your call could not go through no matter how badly you needed to connect with the person on the other end. Before call waiting existed in most homes, a single phone line could handle only one conversation at a time, and anyone else trying to reach that number heard nothing but flat rejection. You dialed carefully, waited through the silence, and then that rhythmic beeping crushed every hope of speaking to the person you needed to reach. There was no voicemail system to leave a message, no way to know when they would finally hang up, and absolutely no option except to keep trying over and over again until luck was on your side. Important news waited while lines stayed tied up with teenage gossip or long-distance calls to relatives who talked for hours. The busy signal became a sound of helplessness, a reminder that connection required luck and timing rather than technology working in your favor. People developed patience for that noise, redialing dozens of times until finally the ringing started and relief flooded through the receiver. Printing dot matrix banners for birthdays was a noisy, time-consuming process that somehow made every celebration feel more personal and more homemade than anything a store could sell. In the 1980s, these printers used continuous feed paper with perforated edges that tore off in satisfying strips once the grinding job was done. The printer head moved back and forth with a loud, rhythmic clatter, punching tiny dots into the paper to form blocky letters that spelled out names, messages, and congratulations in fonts that looked charmingly primitive. Kids watched in fascination as the banner slowly emerged from the machine, each pass of the head adding more detail until the full message stretched several feet across. Tearing off the perforated edges became a ritual of its own, a satisfying rip that left clean borders and made the banner feel finished. People hung these creations across doorways, over party tables, and along walls, proud of the effort even when the letters came out crooked. The noise of that printer, the smell of the ink ribbon, and the texture of that paper all combined into a sensory memory that glossy digital printing can never quite replicate. Leaving the house with no way to be reached was a freedom that defined the 1980s in ways that feel almost impossible to explain to anyone who grew up with a phone in their pocket. Once you walked out the door, you were truly gone, untethered from parents, bosses, friends, and anyone else who might want to track you down. There were no text messages, no location sharing, No notifications buzzing in your pocket to remind you that the world was still waiting. If someone needed to reach you, they simply had to wait until you came home, and that waiting was accepted as completely normal. Kids spent entire summer days roaming neighborhoods, parks, and shopping centers without a single check-in call. Parents trusted that their children would return by dark, and children trusted that freedom would always feel this open and unmonitored. There was something powerful about being unreachable, a kind of independence that required trust on both sides of every relationship. Today, the idea of stepping outside without a device feels almost reckless, but back then it was simply how life worked. That complete disconnection gave people space to breathe, think, and exist without constant interruption from the outside world. Adjusting tracking on the VCR to fix the picture was one of those mysterious household skills that every family in the 1980s had to master, even though nobody really understood why it worked. When the picture on a recorded tape started rolling, jumping, or filling with wavy horizontal lines, the only solution was to reach for the tracking dial and twist it slowly until the image settled down. Sometimes you turned it left, sometimes right, and sometimes you had to hold it in just the right spot while the tape played, afraid to move your fingers. Different tapes required different settings, so what worked for one movie might ruin another entirely. Kids learned to adjust tracking almost instinctively, treating the dial like a magic knob that could save movie night from disaster. Parents handed off the task to whichever child had the steadiest hand and the most patience for the endless fine-tuning involved. The tracking adjustment became a pre-movie ritual, something you did automatically before settling into the couch with popcorn and blankets. Today, digital video has erased that entire experience, leaving only the memory of squinting at wavy screens and hoping the next twist would finally bring clarity. Calling Moviefone to check showtimes was a weekly ritual that tested patience, memory, and the ability to navigate an endless maze of automated voice menus. In the 1980s, finding out when a movie was playing meant picking up the phone, dialing a number everyone in town knew by heart, and then pressing buttons through layers of options until the right theater and film finally appeared. The recorded voice rattled off times in a cheerful but mechanical tone, and if you missed the one you needed, you had to wait through the entire list again or start over from the beginning. People sat with pen and paper ready, scribbling down showtimes before the recording moved on to the next film. The process could take several minutes, especially on weekends when everyone in the city seemed to be planning the same trip to the movies. Getting disconnected meant starting over completely, and busy signals during peak hours were frustratingly common. That phone call became part of the anticipation, a small adventure before the real entertainment even began. Today, a quick glance at a screen provides more information in seconds than Moviefone ever could, but something about that slow process made every movie feel more earned. Handwriting letters and waiting days for a reply was the primary way people stayed connected over distance in the 1980s, a slow and deliberate form of communication that required real effort and genuine patience. You sat down with paper and pen, thought carefully about what to say, and wrote out your thoughts in handwriting that revealed mood, personality, and care. Mistakes meant starting over or crossing out words with obvious lines, so every letter carried a rawness that typed messages could never match. Once finished, you folded the pages, sealed them in an envelope, added a stamp, and dropped the letter into a mailbox knowing it would take days to arrive. Then came the waiting, checking your own mailbox hopefully, wondering if your words had landed safely and what response they might have sparked. The anticipation made every reply feel like a gift, something worth savoring rather than skimming. Friendships and romances built on handwritten letters developed slowly but deeply, with each exchange carrying weight that instant messages cannot replicate. That patience taught people to choose their words carefully, to say what mattered, and to value connection in ways that speed has quietly erased. Buying disposable cameras for vacations was a tradition that shaped how families documented memories throughout the 1980s, turning every trip into a carefully rationed collection of moments. These plastic cameras came preloaded with a roll of film that allowed only 24 or 36 shots, and once those exposures were gone, the camera was finished forever. People thought carefully before pressing the shutter button. knowing that every click brought them closer to the end of the roll. Kids learned to ask permission before taking photos, and parents saved the remaining shots for landmarks and moments that truly mattered. There was no preview screen, no delete button, and no way to know if the picture worked until weeks later when the developed prints arrived. Blurry shots, closed eyes, and fingers covering the lens all became part of the permanent record because nothing could be undone. That limitation forced people to be present in ways that unlimited digital storage has quietly erased. The anticipation of seeing those prints, the surprise of forgotten moments, and the acceptance of imperfection made every vacation album feel more honest and human. Rabbit ear antennas wrapped in aluminum foil became a familiar sight on televisions in homes where cable was an impossible expense. In the 1980s, families adjusted those thin metal rods constantly, searching for the magic angle that would turn static into something watchable. Kids stood beside the television holding the antenna, acting as human signal boosters while someone shouted directions from the couch. A little to the left. Now up. No. Back where it was. The foil was supposed to help. Crinkled sheets wrapped around the tips like silver flags, promising better reception. Sometimes it worked for a few minutes before the picture dissolved into snow again. Entire evenings revolved around chasing a clear signal, twisting and tilting until everyone gave up and watched through the fuzz anyway. The antenna became a family project, a shared frustration, and eventually a running joke that carried into adulthood. But underneath the laughter was the truth that cable cost money no one had, and rabbit ears were the only bridge to the outside world. Those foil-wrapped antennas were never just about television. They were about making do when the world offered better to everyone else. Buying cigarettes for parents at the corner store was a common errand for children throughout the 1980s, as routine as picking up milk or bread. Kids walked into convenience stores, asked for a specific brand, handed over crumpled bills, and walked out with a pack tucked under their arm without anyone raising an eyebrow. Clerks never asked for identification because nobody expected them to. Parents trusted their children with the task because it saved them a trip, and shopkeepers saw nothing unusual about selling tobacco to a minor acting on behalf of an adult. The transaction felt ordinary, even helpful, a small responsibility that made kids feel grown up and capable. Some children memorized their parents' preferred brands before they could spell their own last names. Today, though, selling tobacco to minors is a criminal offense that can result in fines, license revocations, and even jail time for repeat offenders. Identification checks are mandatory, and the idea of sending a child to buy cigarettes feels not just outdated, but shocking. The errand that once seemed so innocent now represents a world that no longer exists. Lead-soldered copper cookware was one of those kitchen treasures that grandparents and parents alike displayed with pride in the 1980s. These gleaming pots and pans hung from ceiling racks or rested in cupboards reserved for special occasions, promising even heating and a beauty that stainless steel simply could not match. Families cooked tomato sauces, wine reductions, and citrus glazes without ever wondering what the solder joints might be releasing into the food. The problem was that lead dissolved slowly but steadily whenever acidic ingredients touched those joints, turning beloved family recipes into quiet sources of contamination. Nobody suspected a thing because the pots looked clean and performed beautifully. When medical researchers began documenting the effects of chronic lead exposure, including cognitive damage and developmental delays in children, the cookware that once symbolized quality became a serious concern. Regulators eventually banned lead solder in food contact items, and families were urged to retire their old copper pieces. The pots that once gleamed with pride now sit in antique shops, reminders of a time when danger hid inside beautiful kitchen traditions. Hand-me-down clothes from older siblings or neighbors filled closets and dressers in homes where buying new was a luxury reserved for rare occasions. In the 1980s, children wore jeans with patched knees, shirts with faded logos, and jackets that had already survived 3 or 4 other kids before landing in their hands. Nothing fit perfectly because nothing was chosen with your body in mind. Sleeves hung too long or too short, waistbands needed belts to stay up, and colors had long since lost their original brightness. Kids learned to stop asking for new things because the answer was always the same. Wait for your cousin to outgrow something, then it will be yours. The clothes carried history in every stain and stretched seam, stories from lives you did not live but now wore against your skin. Some hand-me-downs came from church donation bins, folded neatly into bags that parents carried home without saying where they came from. It was not charity to them. It was practicality, survival, and making do with whatever showed up. Those borrowed clothes taught kids that identity was not something you wore. It was something you carried inside, no matter what covered the outside. Letting kids walk miles to school unsupervised was one of the defining rituals of childhood in the 1980s. Children left the house with backpacks slung over their shoulders and headed down sidewalks, across busy intersections, and through neighborhoods where adults barely glanced up from their morning routines. Parents trusted that the world was safe enough, that drivers would stop, that strangers would mind their own business, and that kids would arrive on time without incident. Many children walked in small groups, chattering about homework or television shows, while others preferred the solitary journey that gave them time to think. The walk itself became a classroom, teaching kids about traffic patterns, shortcuts, and the rhythms of their own neighborhoods. Some routes stretched over a mile, crossing highways or railroad tracks without a single adult present. Today, though, such freedom feels almost unimaginable. Schools discourage it, communities report it, and many jurisdictions classify unsupervised walking as potential neglect. What once built independence now raises alarms that echo through parent groups, social services, and courtrooms alike. Teflon pans with unregulated PFOA coatings were marketed as revolutionary miracles in the 1980s, promising effortless cooking and even easier cleanup. Families embraced them enthusiastically, thrilled by the idea of eggs sliding cleanly off the surface and sauces refusing to stick no matter how long they simmered. These pans appeared in wedding registries, holiday gift guides, and nearly every kitchen cupboard across the country. What people did not know was that the coatings contained perfluorooctanoic acid, a chemical that released toxic fumes when pans overheated on high flames. Families cooked on these surfaces daily, sometimes leaving empty pans on hot burners or cranking the heat higher than manufacturers recommended. The fumes were invisible but dangerous, capable of causing flu-like symptoms in humans and proving fatal to pet birds in the same room. Researchers eventually documented the health risks and environmental persistence of PFOA, leading to voluntary phase-outs and tighter regulations. Modern non-stick coatings no longer contain the chemical, but for years those gleaming pans sat on stoves across the nation, quietly releasing hazards with every overheated meal. Bread bags worn over shoes in winter were a survival trick passed down quietly from parent to child in households where new boots were simply not an option. In the 1980s, kids pulled plastic bags over their socks before sliding into worn-out sneakers, hoping the thin layer would keep the wet and cold from soaking through. The bags crinkled with every step, making a sound that felt impossibly loud on the walk to school, as if the whole world could hear your family's budget in each footfall. Snow seeped through holes anyway, but the bread bags bought a little time before the chill set in completely. Parents tied them tight around ankles, tucking the edges into pant legs to hide the makeshift waterproofing from anyone who might look too closely. It was embarrassing and necessary all at once, the kind of solution that made perfect sense at home, but felt unbearable in public. Other kids never seemed to have plastic bags peeking out from their boots, and that difference spoke louder than words ever could. Those crinkled bags became a quiet symbol of what families did to keep going when the money ran out and winter refused to wait. Allowing kids to play with realistic toy guns in public was one of the most common sights in neighborhoods throughout the 1980s. Children chased each other through yards, parks, and streets carrying plastic pistols, cap guns, and replica rifles that looked nearly identical to the real thing. Parents bought these toys without hesitation, believing they encouraged imaginative play, outdoor activity, and the kind of adventurous spirit childhood was supposed to nurture. Nobody worried about how a passing driver or a concerned neighbor might react because everyone understood these were toys. The bangs, the smoke from cap rolls, and the dramatic falls were all part of games that stretched from morning until the streetlights flickered on. Police rarely intervened, and when they did, it was usually with a smile and a wave. Today, though, realistic toy guns have been banned or heavily restricted in most areas. Orange tips are mandatory, sales are regulated, and children carrying anything resembling a weapon can trigger emergency responses that end in tragedy. The innocent play that once filled summer afternoons is now viewed through a lens of fear that the 1980s never anticipated. Cadmium-glazed ceramic mixing bowls were cherished staples in 1980s kitchens, their bright oranges, sunny yellows, and deep reds adding cheerful color to every baking session. Families stacked them neatly in cupboards, reached for them when mixing cookie dough or whipping cream, and passed them down through generations like treasured heirlooms. The colors seemed harmless, even joyful, making the act of cooking feel more festive and personal. But cadmium, the heavy metal responsible for those vivid hues, did not stay locked inside the glaze forever. When acidic ingredients like lemon juice, vinegar, or tomato sauce sat in these bowls, the cadmium slowly leached into the mixture. Families consumed it unknowingly, bite after bite, meal after meal, trusting the bowls that had been part of their kitchens for years. Researchers eventually connected cadmium exposure to kidney damage, bone weakening, and other serious health concerns. Regulations tightened around ceramic glazes, and safer alternatives replaced the old formulas. But for decades, those cheerful bowls sat at the center of family kitchens, holding dangers no one could see beneath their beautiful surfaces. Generic brand groceries in plain white packaging were impossible to ignore, sitting on pantry shelves like silent announcements of how tight things really were. In the 1980s, these no-frills products lined the cabinets of families who learned early that taste mattered less than price. The cans had no colorful labels, no friendly mascots, just bold black letters spelling out exactly what was inside: corn, beans, soup, nothing else. Kids learned not to bring snacks to school because pulling out a plain white bag invited questions no one wanted to answer. Parents stacked these products carefully, grateful for the savings but aware of what the packaging said without saying it. The cereal boxes were the worst because every morning started with a reminder that name brands belonged to other families. There was no prize inside, no cartoon character smiling from the front, just flakes that tasted close enough to keep everyone fed. Those plain white labels taught lessons about pride, silence, and survival that stayed with people long after the groceries were gone. It was never just about food. It was about understanding, very young, that the world noticed what your family could afford. Leaving kids home alone at age 6 or 7 was simply part of life in the 1980s, something parents did without guilt, fear, or a second thought. Children came home from school, unlocked the door with a key tied to their shoelace, and entertained themselves for hours until a parent returned from work. They were called latchkey kids, and the term carried no shame, only a quiet sense of independence that the era valued above almost everything else. Kids learned to heat up leftovers, answer the phone politely, and manage small emergencies without adult supervision. Parents trusted their children to handle responsibility, believing it built character and prepared them for the real world. Nobody worried about neighbors calling authorities or strangers peering through windows. The house felt safe, familiar, and entirely theirs for those precious afternoon hours. Today, though, leaving a young child home alone can trigger investigations, legal consequences, and accusations of neglect. Child welfare laws in many states now set minimum age requirements that would have seemed absurd to families in the 1980s. The freedom that once taught self-reliance is now treated as abandonment. Formaldehyde-coated laminate countertops covered kitchens throughout the 1980s, offering a sleek and modern look that felt like the future of home design. Families loved the smooth surfaces, the endless color options, and the ease of cleaning that made laminate seem like the perfect upgrade from older materials. These countertops resisted scratches, wiped clean in seconds, and brought a polished appearance to kitchens on nearly any budget. What people did not realize was that the adhesives and coatings binding these surfaces together released formaldehyde gas, especially in warm kitchens where ovens ran for hours and sunlight poured through windows. The fumes were invisible but unmistakable to anyone who noticed a faint chemical smell lingering in the air. Families breathed it in while cooking dinner and gathering around the counter for morning coffee. When health officials documented the link between formaldehyde exposure and respiratory problems, the demand for safer materials grew rapidly. Regulations eventually tightened, pushing manufacturers toward low-emission products. But for years, those bright laminate countertops quietly off-gassed into the rooms where families spent the most time together. Government cheese from the surplus program showed up in kitchens like a quiet confession that times were harder than anyone wanted to admit. That thick orange block came wrapped in plain packaging and weighed more than any store-bought cheese ever did. Families sliced it for sandwiches, melted it over noodles, and grated it onto whatever else needed flavor, stretching it as far as it could possibly go. The taste was unmistakable, rich, and almost too salty, the kind of flavor that stuck with you whether you wanted it to or not. Kids grew up thinking all cheese tasted like that until they visited a friend's house and realized the difference. Lines at distribution centers wound around buildings, filled with parents clutching vouchers and hoping no one from the neighborhood noticed them waiting. It was survival wrapped in government paper, something given freely, but never without a cost to pride. People made jokes about it years later, turning the memory into something lighter than it actually felt at the time. But the truth was that block of cheese fed families when nothing else could, and no amount of humor ever really erased what it meant to need it. Letting kids sit on laps in the front seat during drives was something parents did without hesitation throughout the 1980s. Children perched on a parent's knee, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling like they were actually helping guide the car. Older siblings held younger ones, and sometimes entire families squeezed into front bench seats designed for exactly this kind of togetherness. Nobody thought about airbags, crash statistics, or the physics of a sudden impact. The closeness felt natural, even protective, as if a parent's arms could shield a child from anything. Car seats existed, but they were flimsy contraptions many families ignored once children outgrew infancy. Seat belts went unused or tucked behind backs because they felt uncomfortable. The front seat was a privilege kids earned by being old enough to see over the dashboard. Today, though, strict child restraint laws require approved car seats, booster seats, and rear seating until specific ages and weights are reached. The cozy front seat rides that once felt like bonding moments are now illegal in every state. Replaced by regulations designed to save lives, the 1980s simply did not count. Aluminum pressure cookers without safety valves were kitchen workhorses in the 1980s, promising faster meals with less fuel and more convenience than traditional stovetop methods. Families used them for stews, beans, soups, and anything else that benefited from high-pressure cooking. The lids clamped down tightly, the steam built up quickly, and dinner appeared in a fraction of the usual time. What nobody anticipated was what happened when the pressure exceeded safe limits and the cooker had no way to release it. These budget models lacked the safety mechanisms that modern cookers take for granted, and when something went wrong, it went wrong catastrophically. Lids launched toward ceilings, scalding contents erupted across kitchens, and families found themselves dealing with burns, broken cabinets, and shattered trust in a device they had used for years. Reports of explosions mounted through the decade until regulators demanded stricter safety standards. Modern pressure cookers now feature multiple release valves and locking mechanisms, making the old aluminum models relics of a more dangerous time. The convenience they promised came with risks that only became clear after too many kitchens paid the price. Powdered milk mixed from a box sat in kitchen cabinets across the country, waiting to be stirred into cold water and poured over cereal like the real thing. In the 1980s, families who watched every penny knew this dusty white powder well, scooping it carefully and whisking it into pitchers that never quite looked right. The taste was thin, slightly chalky, and unmistakably different from the fresh milk other kids drank without thinking. No matter how long you chilled it or how hard you stirred, something about powdered milk always gave itself away. Children learned to drink it fast, gulping it down before the flavor had time to settle on the tongue. Parents promised it was the same, just cheaper, but everyone knew the difference even if no one said it out loud. Some families mixed it half and half with real milk to stretch the budget further, creating a compromise that fooled no one but cost a little less. That powdered milk taught kids early that substitutes were part of life, and that wanting something better did not mean you would get it. The memory of that thin white liquid stayed with people for decades, long after they could finally afford the real thing. Riding in the back of a pickup truck was one of those childhood thrills that defined summer in the 1980s. Kids piled into open truck beds with the wind whipping through their hair, legs dangling over tailgates, and arms stretched wide like they were flying. Parents saw nothing wrong with it, because that was simply how families traveled, especially in rural areas where trucks outnumbered sedans and seatbelts were considered optional. Nobody thought about what would happen during a sudden stop or a swerve on gravel roads. The freedom felt limitless, and the danger felt invisible. Kids waved at passing cars, laughed at bumps that sent them bouncing, and treated every ride like a mini adventure. It was a bonding experience, a shared memory that entire generations carry with them still. Today, though, letting children ride unsecured in truck beds is illegal in most states, classified as reckless endangerment and punishable by fines or worse. What once symbolized carefree childhood now represents one of the clearest examples of how drastically safety standards have shifted since the days when the open road felt endlessly forgiving. Mercury dial meat thermometers were essential tools in kitchens across the 1980s, trusted to deliver accurate readings every time a roast or turkey came out of the oven. The slender glass tubes with their silver columns felt precise and reassuringly old-fashioned in an era fascinated by gadgets. Parents stabbed them into holiday birds without hesitation, checking temperatures while steam rose and ovens hummed. What nobody considered was what happened when the glass cracked or shattered, something that occurred far more often than people like to admit. A dropped thermometer or an accidental knock against a roasting pan could send tiny beads of mercury rolling across cutting boards or directly onto the food itself. Mercury is extraordinarily toxic, capable of causing neurological damage even in small doses, and cleaning up a spill was nearly impossible without professional help. By the time regulators restricted mercury in household products, countless families had unknowingly handled broken thermometers with bare hands. Today, digital thermometers have replaced those old glass tubes entirely, but the memory of that delicate silver line remains etched into holiday cooking memories. Using the oven for heat when the furnace broke was a dangerous but common survival trick during brutal winter months in the 1980s. Families turned the dial to 400 degrees, cracked the oven door open, and huddled around the warm glow radiating from the kitchen into rooms that had grown impossibly cold. Parents knew it was risky, but the alternative was watching children shiver through another night without heat. The gas bill was already unpaid, the furnace repair too expensive to consider, and the landlord impossible to reach when problems arose. So the oven became the hearth, the kitchen became the living room, and blankets became armor against the chill that crept through walls and windows. Kids did homework at the kitchen table just to stay near the warmth, their breath still visible in the far corners of the house. No one talked about it outside the family because admitting you heated your home with an oven invited judgment no one needed. It was survival dressed in silence, a solution born of desperation that somehow got families through one more winter. The memory of that open oven door stays with people, a reminder of how close to the edge things actually were. Letting kids drink sips of beer or wine at family gatherings was treated as harmless fun in the 1980s, a small indulgence that made children feel included in adult celebrations. Uncles offered tiny tastes from their cans. Grandparents poured half inches of wine into juice glasses, and parents laughed as kids made faces at the bitter or sour flavors they were not yet ready to enjoy. Nobody considered it dangerous or inappropriate because it happened at home, surrounded by family, in a context that felt safe and controlled. Many parents believed early exposure would teach moderation and prevent the rebellious binge drinking they feared would come later. It was a rite of passage wrapped in holiday dinners, backyard barbecues, and wedding receptions where everyone shared everything. But medical research and legal standards have since drawn firm lines around minors and alcohol. Giving alcohol to anyone under 21 is now illegal in most circumstances, regardless of setting or intent. What families once saw as bonding has become a liability, a shift that transformed innocent sips into something modern law treats very differently. Asbestos-lined toaster ovens were tucked onto kitchen counters across the country in the 1980s, humming quietly while families waited for bagels to brown and cheese to bubble. These compact appliances felt like miracles of convenience, small enough to fit anywhere and powerful enough to handle almost any quick meal. Parents loved them because they saved time, and kids loved them because they meant warm snacks without waiting for a full-sized oven to heat up. What nobody thought about was the material lining the interior walls, a heat-resistant layer designed to protect the outer casing from scorching temperatures. Over time, as the linings aged and cracked from repeated heating cycles, microscopic fibers began releasing into the air families breathed while standing nearby waiting for toast. Scientists eventually linked those fibers to devastating respiratory diseases, and regulators moved to ban asbestos from household products entirely. By then, millions of these toaster ovens had already found their way into homes, sitting silently on counters while families gathered in kitchens they believed were completely safe. Layaway plans at department stores were the only way many families managed to afford Christmas gifts, school clothes, or anything that cost more than a week's groceries. In the 1980s, parents walked into stores with a list, picking out items they could not take home yet, but could slowly pay off over weeks or months. The clerk wrote everything down, tagged the merchandise, and tucked it into a back room where it waited until the final payment cleared. Kids sometimes saw their gifts being carried to layaway, wrapped in mystery and patience, knowing they existed but unable to touch them yet. Every paycheck, parents returned to chip away at the balance, watching the total shrink while hoping nothing unexpected wiped out the progress. Missing a payment meant losing everything, so families sacrificed small pleasures to keep those layaway slips current. When pickup day finally arrived, it felt like a victory. Arms full of bags that represented months of quiet discipline and careful saving. That system taught children something profound about delayed gratification, about wanting something and working toward it $1 at a time. Layaway was hope with a payment plan attached. Using corporal punishment as primary discipline was something almost every household in the 1980s accepted without debate. Spankings, paddlings, and the occasional swat with a wooden spoon were considered normal tools of parenting, passed down through generations as the surest way to correct behavior. Schools reinforced the message, with principals keeping paddles in their offices and teachers allowed to administer physical consequences for misbehavior. Kids grew up understanding that breaking rules meant physical discomfort, and most parents believed this approach taught respect and self-control. Nobody questioned whether it worked because everyone around them did the same thing. The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," echoed through churches and neighborhood conversations like unshakable truth. But over the following decades, research revealed how physical punishment could harm development and long-term well-being. Schools across the country banned the practice, and many states now regulate what parents can legally do at home. What was once considered responsible parenting is now viewed through a lens of concern that the 1980s never imagined. Plastic cutting boards with toxic dyes were common fixtures in 1980s kitchens, offered in rainbow colors that made food preparation feel more organized and stylish. Families assigned different colors to different tasks, using red for meats, green for vegetables, and yellow for poultry, believing they were practicing smart kitchen hygiene. The boards were lightweight, affordable, and easy to clean, making them seem like the obvious choice over heavier wooden alternatives. What nobody questioned was what happened when sharp knives scored deep grooves into the plastic, and those colorful dyes began transferring onto food. The pigments used in many of these boards contained chemicals never intended for food contact, and repeated cutting created perfect channels for contamination. Families sliced tomatoes, diced onions, and carved roasts on surfaces that slowly released harmful substances with every meal. It took years for safety standards to catch up, eventually requiring food-safe dyes and stricter testing for any product meant to touch ingredients. Those cheerful rainbow boards have since been replaced by safer options, but they remain a reminder of how easily danger hid inside everyday kitchen tools. Kool-Aid instead of real juice showed up at every meal in homes where stretching the grocery budget meant choosing powder over bottles. In the 1980s, that brightly colored drink mix cost almost nothing, and a single packet could fill an entire pitcher when stirred with tap water and enough sugar to mask the artificial taste. Kids drank it red, purple, orange, and every other color offered, never realizing that juice from actual fruit was something other families poured without thinking. The powder-stained lips, tongues, and the plastic pitchers that held it, leaving rings of color that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Parents mixed it strong or weak depending on how much was left in the cupboard, sometimes watering it down so far that the flavor barely registered. It was refreshing enough on hot days and sweet enough to feel like a treat, even when it was not. Birthday parties served it proudly, and summer afternoons ended with sticky faces and empty glasses. Kool-Aid was never a choice in those homes. It was what existed when money dictated everything. That powdered drink taught kids that what you could afford shaped what you consumed, and wanting better did not change the facts. Letting kids operate power tools without supervision was considered a normal part of growing up in the 1980s, especially in households where fathers worked with their hands and expected their children to learn the same skills. Boys and girls alike learned to use circular saws, drills, and sanders long before they reached their teenage years. Parents believed that hands-on experience taught responsibility, coordination, and respect for dangerous equipment in ways no lecture ever could. Kids built birdhouses, repaired fences, and helped with home improvement projects while sawdust covered their clothes and the whine of machinery filled the garage. Accidents happened, but they were treated as lessons rather than crises. A scraped knuckle or a close call that reinforced caution better than any warning. Nobody called Child Protective Services over a 10-year-old using a jigsaw. Today, though, safety guidelines, insurance restrictions, and liability concerns have transformed power tools into adult-only territory. Manufacturers print age warnings, schools require supervision, and the idea of handing a child a running saw feels reckless by modern standards. Before you go, tell us which forgotten 80s habit surprised you most. Tap like if this trip through vanished routines brought back memories, and subscribe so you never miss another dive into the world we left behind.